I just wanted to see Kim's head spin around, so it's okay. Are we still screen sharing okay?
Fine.
All right, good. Let's see how I can minimize this floating thing. Well, maybe not. I can't do it for now. All right, so we monitor or evaluating billing effectiveness. Asbel did a phenomenal job yesterday, and I did participate in his session regarding the high-level reports and that kind of stuff. I'm going to share with you a little bit of more granular information about some billing evaluations that we have done. Our organization actually outsourced our billing last year. For 35, 36 years, we did our own in-house billing, and we stopped doing that. We outsourced it, and we're now monitoring them very, very closely with what they're doing. And also, I have the blessing of doing some work with a couple of consulting firms that do evaluations of fire department, commercial, different providers, overall effectiveness, and a lot of that involves doing their billing review. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that we found when we've done some of the reviews. So here's what we're going to try and do. Get the screen to work. Go a little bit through revenue cycle management, but Asbel did a great job with that. So we're going to go pretty quickly through that. We'll talk a little bit about what impacts your billing performance, the types of reports and data that you should be using to evaluate your billing. Just a quick show of hands. And I'm going to put my video back up on the screen so I can see how many people actually respond. But for the room, raise your hand if you're doing your own billing. Kim, is it fair to say no one's raising? Oh, a couple of people raising their hand. How many? Two. Okay. And a couple of folks online. Everybody else is using a contractor, right?
Yes. Yes.
Cool. So a lot of this will have to do with evaluating the performance of your contractor, which will be really good. And again, part of a little bit of what Asbel went over last time. Take a look at some of the metrics, and there you go. Now, things that impact your billing performance. Obviously, patient care report documentation. I got to tell you that the biggest issue that many of us have with billing is getting the crews to document well what it is that they're doing. We get ambulance care reports, patient care reports returned pretty frequently from our billing contractor, and even when we're doing it in-house. So make sure that you're educating your crews. And yes, no one likes to talk about Medicare, no one likes to talk about billing, but it is really important because that's really the number one thing. If you can't document well medical necessity, if the crews literally write in their narrative, this patient didn't need an ambulance, they walked to the stretcher, we walked them into the emergency room, that's going to really impact your billing performance. Not getting signatures, that's really important. And I think many systems are really good at doing this now, but some might still be struggling with it. Getting the medical record numbers from the hospital, a hospital face sheet that has the numbers on it, do something. And in many of the patient care reporting software, you can actually put those numbers right into the patient care report, which helps not only from the billing side, but also for outcome data, because in many cases that links to an HDE or an HIE that allows that record to query a medical record number at the hospital and get some outcome fields. So to the extent that you're able to do that, it's really important to try and get your crews to do that. Being able to interface with your hospitals. So our billing office, and both when we had it in-house and when we outsourced it, have permission and have an interface with our hospitals. So that if they want to go look up a face sheet, look up to see if a patient who previously did not have Medicaid now has become eligible for Medicaid. That is information that generally hospitals do a much better job with getting that information, and having that linkage will work really, really well. In one of the projects that we're currently working on in San Diego County, California, the billing contractor really struggled with billing until they had a good interface with the hospitals, and the hospitals were able then to give them information about insurance and whatnot that they get a day later. Because oftentimes on the EMS side, we just don't know, and it's easier to get it from a hospital database. So that really helps. Fee structure. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but remember, we're going to talk a little bit about it now. The collection percentage is not really that important. If you've got really high fees and a medium to low Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, your collection percentage is going to be low, but that's okay. You want to talk about cash, not collection rates. And then timing. Asbel did a great job talking about this yesterday. It's really not as important getting that first bill out the door than it is getting good information to know when to bill. When we transitioned to our outside agency to do the billing, the first month or two, our private payer mix skyrocketed because they were all about getting the bill out the door. And if they didn't have insurance information, they just sent it to the patient. And that made it a patient pay bill, which dramatically impacts revenue, and it delayed a lot of that collection. Now they've slowed down quite a bit. They've got longer DSOs, but that's okay because now they're getting information from the hospitals or other places to know that, hey, this is a Medicare patient, this is a Cigna patient, this is an Aetna patient. So they're actually slowing down the days to send the bill out, but the collection dollars, the dollars collected, have gotten much better. So that's okay. Boy, I'm struggling with the screen here. Hopefully, is it advancing okay on your end, Kim?
Yes.
Okay, cool. EMS billing, as you all know, is complicated and it's hard. The different fee structures, the Medicare allowables, we've talked about that, commercial payers, network status. So I want to talk a little bit about network status. Asbel talked about it a little bit in his contracting discussions, but you guys have been through it, and a bunch of people, including Tim and others, did a really good job with your commercial balanced billing legislation. But generally speaking, network agreements are difficult to do for EMS for really two reasons. One, most insurers don't care about us. We are less than 1% of their spend, and we're complicated. And oftentimes they just don't want to deal with it. And they're just going to not even want to offer a network agreement and just continue to underpay, balance bill the patient, and chips fall as they may. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you think there's a lot of turnover in EMS, there is twice as much turnover in payer. Sorry, sound of freedom going overhead. Sorry about that. In the payer community. When we've done some of our network agreements, we've dealt with 3 or 4 or 5 different people throughout the course of 6 months because they keep changing. Roles keep changing, personnel. So finding the right person and then keeping them throughout that process also becomes very difficult. But even given that, one of the biggest challenges with the network model is if you are a primary 911 provider, there is no economic incentive whatsoever for you to go and network and accept a lower rate. And this is a conversation that we have had with our Medicare Advantage payers, with our commercial payers, because the first thing they'll say is, hey, we're currently paying you $1,500 for an emergency ambulance call. We want to pay you $1,200, and you'll make it up in volume. And for a physician's practice, for other types of healthcare, that may be true. But for a primarily 911 EMS provider, that is not true. And we've explained this to our commercial payers to say, listen, just because we go in network with United Healthcare, more people aren't going to call 911. The same number of people are going to be calling. So we would, in essence, be accepting a lower fee in return for no additional volume. So unless you can find those economies of scale, those other economic incentives, like Asbel mentioned yesterday, for claims processing and other things, it's very difficult to do that if they're going to want a discount. And that's typically what they're going to want. And certainly you're not going to be able to balance bill. I will share with you a funny story. When we were negotiating a capitated fee with Blue Cross Blue Shield, they were going to get a flat monthly fee, no billing, that kind of stuff. When we were going over the economics, we found that their data on what they were paying us was about $200 less per patient contact than the data that we had that they were paying us. We showed that we were getting an average of $1,300 a patient contact. They were showing $1,150, and we were struggling because where does that difference come from? Well, we realized that it was the balance bill payments that the patient was paying but was still technically showing up as a Blue Cross Blue Shield claim that we collected $1,300 from. And when we said to Blue Cross Blue Shield, listen, we need to make that up. So either let's add 11 cents to the capitated fee, or we're going to still balance bill your patients the $200, $250, which is now you need to send us EOBs for every patient contact. You're going to need to do all that kind of stuff. And without even hesitation, they said, yeah, just add the 11 cents. We don't want to do billing. We want to get away from that whole process. So they ended up contracting with us at a rate higher than they were typically paying on the actual claim. But the value to them was more in the downstream, preventing the ER visit, addressing the high utilizers, that kind of stuff. So just be wary of that, or be aware of that as you go into network discussions with payers. And then, of course, the politics on both ends. So if you're have high fees and people call and complain, then your city council, your county commission starts getting a little bit anxious. If you're undercharging and your collections are low, therefore you're relying more on tax dollars, that also is not easy. So it's a very fine line that you got to walk through this political quagmire, if you will. And this is now everybody knows this answer, right? Which matters most, the collection percentage of the dollars collected? Obviously, the answer is the dollars collected. So we currently right now have a 23% collection rate. That's fine. We're collecting more than we did last year. That's even better, because we really care about the dollars in the door. So let's talk about some of the granular KPIs. So these are reports from an outside billing agency for a county system in California. And they outsource the billing. The county does. The county is the provider. We talked yesterday about how can a GEMT benefit be afforded to a private contractor. So in this particular scenario, the county is the provider, but they don't own an ambulance. They contract with a private provider to provide the actual ambulance service. I'm sorry, they contract with both a private provider and a fire department JPA, two fire departments that came together to form a JPA to serve this particular area. But the county pays the provider a fixed monthly fee. The county does all the billing, and therefore the county is the provider of record, and they get the GEMT dollars. So it works out pretty well for them. But their outsourced billing contractor, these are some of the reports that they get every month. And you can see as you look at this, they look at each month, they've got in-district, out-of-district, and mutual aid. And where this is important is the in-district fee is lower than the out-of-district fee. And really what this is resident, non-resident. So a resident who lives in that area, who's paying taxes that help fund the system, has a lower fee than the person who crashed their car or whatever outside the system, or who lives outside the system. They get a higher fee. Mutual aid is kind of interesting, and you'll see how this plays out as we look at these reports. In this particular scenario, they have a mutual aid agreement with a neighboring community, and they charge full market rate for the patients in that mutual aid district. So to give you an example, if we, in our service area, charged residents who lived in one of the 15 member cities, we might charge them $1,000 for an ambulance trip. If they live outside of our community, but they crashed their car or they had their heart attack here in the mall or whatever, then we charge them $2,000 because they haven't, paid a tax that's supporting the system. If we respond mutual aid to a community outside of our service area, we bill those patients $3,000 because we can't. And it's not going to be a huge impact. When the people call and complain about the bill, they're not going to call our city council. They're going to call the neighboring city council. And that becomes a bigger issue. So that's exactly what's happening in this particular service area. So you'll see how that plays out in some of the gross patient charges, the net collections, that kind of stuff. So these are the number of incidents that were billed using those different fees. This was the balance due for all those cases. So you can then develop the average charge. So as you can see, for a resident, $1,100, non-resident, $1,300, mutual aid, $2,800. Now remember, this is California. So they live in the People's Republic of California, so things are a little bit different there. Average miles adjustment net charge. So this is the granular level detail that we get every month for this particular service area. And then it's all in one line, but I carried it over here for you. And then here comes your payer mix. So how many of the calls were billed to Medicare? How many of them were billed to managed Medicare? How many went to crossover Medicare, Medi-Cal? How many were Medicaid? How many managed Medicaid, commercial insured, self-pay? This is the granular level detail that you should get, or at least evaluate every month, so you can see specifically what is your billed payer mix, and then what is your cash paid payer mix, because there's a difference. And you really need to monitor that so you can see that, and you'll see how it plays out in some of these scenarios. This is that system. So what we do is an evaluation of call volume, because obviously response volume and transport volume impacts revenue. So we had a hard time initially explaining to some of the county officials that, hey, during the coronavirus pandemic, your revenue is going to go down. And they said, well, why is that? Well, because your call volume is going to go down. And it kind of had to walk through that whole thing. Transport ratio comes into play. Whether or not you're billing for scene treats comes into play. If you are not billing for an ambulance response and treatment of a patient without transport, you should consider that, because it's a pretty decent revenue stream, and you've expended resources to get a unit there, and you've provided some care. To take a little deeper dive into that thought, in many communities, and ours included, if we respond to a call and the caller was a first or second party call, meaning that the patient called themselves or someone who was with the patient called on their behalf, and we provided either some type of advanced assessment, 12 lead EKG, blood sugar, we've done something more than just a visual scan, or we've provided some type of treatment, glucose, nitro, aspirin, breathing treatment. Those patients get billed, and they get billed $500 for the response and no transport. If it's a third party call, meaning the party did not call for themselves, it was a passerby or whatever, or if we just did a very basic assessment and virtually no treatment, ice pack for a wrist injury, something like that, then we don't bill those. But the ones that truly were, you requested it, we went and we did something, you're getting a bill. And most people don't bitch about that. They are a little bit angry that their insurer typically doesn't pay for the ambulance response and no transport. But again, we charge $500 for that. Most of the patients will pay somewhere between, we'll negotiate it to $400, whatever. But it is a pretty decent revenue stream. And if you're not doing it, you really should consider doing it.
Question in the room. Hang on.
I'm sorry?
I think he answered it when he said that most of the patients get upset when their commercial payers don't. But are you seeing a higher percentage of commercial payers starting to pay back?
We are now, especially when we bill the ET3 modifiers. When we bill the AO 998, it's sort of hit or miss. I'll tell you, the insurers who tend to pay well for the scene treat no transport are the auto insurance providers, payers, the Allstates, Geico, because they're sort of used to that, because they often, if a fire department bills a rescue fee or a response fee, then they typically pay that. So they see the EMS response fee no different, and they typically will pay that. So it's not a huge deal.
So are you billing the commercial, if you're an ET3 provider, are you billing the commercial insurance with the ET3 modifier? Is that how
we are, but it's very, 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 very infrequent. And I tell you that because right now, with the exception of one commercial payer, Cigna, none of the commercial payers have formally agreed to pay for an ET3 intervention. Therefore, the crews don't offer it to anyone other than a Medicare or Medicaid patient. Medicare and Medicaid pays for ET3 here. You'll learn more about that this afternoon. But I just finished the reports yesterday, and of the 1,470 approximately ET3 interventions that we have done, 1,350 of them are Medicare or Medicaid. They're not offered to commercially insured patients. because we know they're not going to pay. Now, if the patient AMAs, now we bill it under the AO 998. And again, in some cases we get paid, in some cases we don't. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Collection percentage evaluation. So if you have a contract with your outside billing agency that requires a certain collection percentage, and some have that, this particular one does, then you have to be very careful with your language and with your evaluation of their collection percentage. This is a case where terms matter, words matter. So you'll notice here that in this evaluation, and we provide this to the county because we evaluate the billing contractor here, their contract says that they must collect at least 65% of the net charges. Now, the question then becomes, what is a net charge? So the net charge, by definition in this agreement, is the actual fee less the anticipated contractual allowance applied to that particular bill. So for example, if it's a Medicare patient and the Medicare allowable rate is $500, they bill $1,300, they take a contractual allowance of $700, whatever it is, to discount that down to $500, and that becomes the net charge. So they have to collect 65% of what they expected to collect. We were not part of this contract negotiation. We would have never recommended that because it's generally a fairly easy number to achieve. But that being said, that's the contract that they have. So that's fine. So their requirement is they have to collect at least 65% of the net charges. We then were pretty transparent with both the billing contractor and the county that said, listen, there is a time period that you're not going to collect you're not going to collect much on a claim, because typically it's a 90, 120-day turnaround. If you have to send the chart back to the crew for correction or whatever, it could be longer. So the way that this is structured, and we did recommend this, and it's an amendment to the agreement, they are evaluated in 6-month slices, 6 months in arrears. So you'll see where the arrow is here. This most recent evaluation was looking at the collection percentage from July, dates of service, July of 21 through December of 21. Because when we did this analysis, it was in June of 22. So we were looking at calls from a 6-month period 6 months ago. That gives enough time for the billing agency to work through their revenue cycle, getting the call, billing it, doing an appeal, doing whatever. So you'll see that is sort of replayed. And that's fair, because if you look at what they collected for dates of service in September, it's going to be like a 9% collection rate. Because, and you don't want it to be billed right away. From much what we said earlier, you want them to wait, make sure they got the right payer, bill it to the right people. So 6-month evaluation, a 6-month slice, 6 months in arrears is fair for both. Now, the challenge with that is if you identify a problem, you've gone pretty far down the road into that problem before you can actually identify it. So just make sure you're being diligent with that and communicating with the billing agency or with your billing staff. And there you go. So you'll notice here that when we do the analysis, we do based on resident fees, non-resident fees. We did not do the mutual aid fees because that just started in June of 21. So they're not meeting that 6-month time frame yet. But you can see what the collection percentages are. And this is pretty high. But again, it's net charge, not gross fees. Okay. You can see that non-residents don't pay as well. There's also a smaller N, but overall, they're doing okay. So this is an example of how you can set up part of your billing metric evaluation. Notice here in this particular analysis, this was for a different county service area, same county system, they're the biller, but it's a different provider, different region. Notice that for the most recent evaluation period, they dipped below 65% for the non-residents. Now, overall, they're still at 76%, but we're identifying here, hey, something's going on with your non-resident fees. And you probably need to have a little chat with your billing agency to find out what's going on with the non-residents that they're still billing in your district. And are there any trends that they need to look at? Because if you look at the last 3 evaluation periods, the collection rate's been dipping. And that's what I said. These are calls through December of last year. It probably is going to be worse for the next reporting period until they get it evaluated and fixed, or whatever it is that they need to do. Okay. Average patient.
Matt?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Quick
Yep.
question.
Fire when ready.
When you're talking about the collection of net, can you give us some examples of why they may be below that 65%? What is it about? Because you think net, you should be able to collect that pretty easily, but are there reasons why, so that folks in the room can understand maybe why they're not collecting that and maybe what they could do to improve that? Like, is it payments? Is it they're not following through or following up on private pays? What are the causes?
And that's the questions that you have to ask the billing contractor, Tim. It could be any of those. It could be, that they're sending people to collections too soon. And because they're writing off the bill, they're not collecting it and they're just sending it off to collections. Then you're going to get maybe, a third or a quarter of what that bill was. And they're just writing them off too fast because they don't want to deal with it. They'd rather go after the high dollar, high probability of payment claim instead of going after the claim that seems more challenging to collect. So those are the questions, Tim, that you need to ask the billing agency. What I can tell you here is that they are having an issue with one of the hospitals that some of these patients are going to on the bordering part of their community. And the hospital hasn't been very quick in giving them face sheets and insurance information. So they're having some challenges collecting. But the fact that we raised it allowed the county to ask the question, and that was the response that they got. If you're not watching the metrics, you don't even know to ask the question. Great thought. Average patient charge and net. So this is, again, another example of you want to make sure that you're maximizing the fees that you're charging. So in this particular case, if you look at the residents and looking at the highlighted line here, 3,400 trips for the period of July 21st through December 21st. So they billed in their report 3.9 million, which means that the gross average patient charge out the door is $1,125. Collected is $546. Again, a really good metric, and you need to look at this overall because, again, we really care more about the dollars coming in the door than the collection percentage. And you'll notice that over the last year, almost 2 years now, their cash collected per trip has gone up generally, which is good. That's what you want to see. They're getting better at billing. The rates in this case, the fees hadn't changed, but their billing processes are getting better. Non-resident, they're actually collecting a little bit less. The charge is a little bit higher, not a huge amount higher, but a little bit higher. But again, you'd expect them to collect a lower percentage because the fees are higher and you've got fixed Medicare, fixed Medicaid reimbursement. But you wouldn't expect the overall cash per trip to be lower than it is for the resident. So again, they need to look at this over time, but still you'll see that over the last 2 and 3, marginally 3, reporting periods, their cash collected per transport has gotten better. So that's what you want to see. This also helps you with forecasting, and we'll see that in a moment. Cash collected evaluation. Again, this is how many we've evaluated over time. This is the resident fee. This is a different CSA. Their rates are a little bit lower. Actually, they're a lot lower. So this system is very heavily subsidized. This is a system that is more rural. You can see their call volume is a lot lower. So they receive a lot of tax subsidy because they receive, cost offset, as we learned yesterday. because they get a lot of cost offset, they charge a low fee. Okay, they could switch this around. They could double the fee and perhaps have less cost offset. But this is the policy decision here that they said, hey, we want to just tax the residents. And this is a very high-end community north of San Diego. So they just keep it the way that it is and everybody's happy. So, all right, that's fine. But your fees collected for both resident and non-resident are going to be a little bit lower because you're billing less. Notice the difference here, by the way, the gross APC for the residents are about half what they are for the non-residents. And that's not terribly unusual, but that just shows the main difference there. All right, so forecasting. So part of what these billing reports will help you do is when you really drill down into what's our transport volume, what's our transport volume over time, what types of trips are we billing, and we'll talk more about service mix in just a moment. But this helps to do some projections. What is your call volume increase going to be? What is your transport volume increase going to be? In these particular reports, we really only look at transport volume, but response volume is just as easy. We got some information yesterday from another public utility model system who we're working with to try and help some issues. Their transport ratio is 46%. So their response UHU is 0.86, but their transport UHU is 0.44. So they're generating very little revenue for a whole bunch of activity because very few of the, less than half of the calls that they respond to result in a transport. So we're recommending do what a lot of systems are doing. And when you get, and they're an ACE accredited EMD center, you need to start using QRVs for these low acuity responses. Stop sending $150 an hour ambulances, send a $64 an hour QRV, determine if transport's going to be necessary. If it is, call for one. If not, manage it on scene, do your telehealth, bill for it, through telehealth if you can, and be done with it. That's a way to reduce costs. It's a big deal. Then you can project out your fees. And Tim gave a great example of this yesterday when he tried to play Stump Asbel by showing the question that he had, which is a great question, by the way. But this is just an example of how you can use the KPIs from your billing system, fees collected, et cetera, to develop your budget. And it's really important to be able to do that over time. So again, you get a heads up if there's going to be any issues down the road. Payer mix. Here's an example of another department here in Texas. Actually, I was just on the phone with them, who made the public policy decision that they were going to have a very, very low fee for the services that the fire department ambulance provides. And they're charging $500 on average for an emergency ambulance trip to the hospital. You can see the correlation between what their gross billings are and what they're collecting per service. And they're getting a 50% collection rate, but it's a very, very low dollar amounts. So one of the recommendations that we made to that particular city council was stop charging $500. The fair health analysis for the regions around you is $1,700 for an emergency ambulance call. And there's no reason you shouldn't be charging that, because most of the commercial insurers are going to increase the rate that they're paying you, et cetera, and you're going to go from $245 a trip for the commercial insurance, probably up to $400 or $500 per trip from the commercial insurer or higher, without even breathing hard. And nobody's going to complain about it because the people who don't pay still aren't going to pay. And Medicare and Medicaid doesn't matter, as we talked about yesterday and as Bill mentioned yesterday. So again, for 2021, they weren't much better. Their actual fees for transport collected are going down. They do their own in-house billing, by the way. We also recommended that they outsource it because they've got a couple of people in the basement of City Hall that are doing the ambulance billing, and ambulance billing is complicated, and they shouldn't be doing that. So it's very interesting. So these are their published rates. This is why we don't recommend people do that. So this is our billing agency. I think I have not told you who it is yet on purpose. I hope I didn't slip. But they've been great partners, but boy, they really struggled in the very beginning. And you can see that the beginning of the year, call volume is pretty decent, but they really struggled with some of the gross charges. And I think they, again, have gotten much better, but this is a real concern for us as we started. But you'll notice that it's gotten better over time. And we just want to make sure that they stay on that. So again, keep those metrics in mind. So we talked about the following metrics: collection percentage versus cash per transport. We would really recommend that you really use cash per transport. Payer mix is going to impact your cash collected. If you got a high Medicare and Medicaid, those are fixed amounts. If you got good commercial payer, that department that I just showed you guys, they've got a really interesting dynamic going on that's impacting their billing. So for years, decades, that community was it's a coastal community here in Texas. And they had a very, very, very poor patient payer mix. A lot of Medicaid, a lot of uninsured, very few commercially insured people. Those that were commercially insured worked for the city, very little business. Well, a rocket ship building firm moved in because it was a good investment for them, and they built a rocket production facility in their community. Their response volume has dropped. Their payer mix has gotten much, much better because most of the people moving into that community are young professionals. They're rocket scientists. They are welders and engineers and all that sort of stuff. And they've been moving in at a very high rate. So they don't use EMS as much. They don't, use healthcare as much. They've got insurance. They see the doctor. They've got other lifestyle issues, and they have insurance. So they've seen a reduction in their response and transport volume, but an increase in their cash collected for the services that they're providing. So that is a great example of how payer mix can really impact your revenue, which is part of the reason why we're recommending that they charge market rates, because they've got so many commercially insured patients moving into their community. So again, make sure you keep an eye on payer mix, and payer mix both on billed and collected, because of the collection percentages by payer type. As Bill mentioned yesterday, days to bill is not as important as it was before, especially with high deductible. So if you have somebody with a high deductible health plan, Solutions Group does a great job of monitoring the deductible status of that patient. And they will hold the bill until they see that others have billed and the deductible has been eaten up by the emergency physician group, by the radiology group, by the pharmacy group, by the hospital. And then as they get close to meeting their deductible, now bill, because you're going to get paid by the commercial insurer, as opposed to the commercial insurer saying, yep, it's covered. Yep, here's what we would have paid, but it's applied to the deductible, so you need to bill the patient, and good luck collecting it from them. So deductible monitoring is really important to do. Also, one of the metrics that you should require of your billing agency are patient experience metrics, because you want an evaluation typically done by an external agency about how kind and wonderful and supportive and helpful your billing agency is, whether it's internal or contracted. So that really should be one of the metrics that you require, that randomly patients get surveyed based on whatever criteria that you want to use, and that the evaluation of their billing experience is used over time to measure the effectiveness of the billing process from the patient's perspective, which is really important. And with that, yes, please, we're at the time for questions.
I have a question in the chat.
I'm ready.
So Eric is asking, do you recommend publishing your base rates?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, you don't want to be accused of shady practices, not telling people what you're going to charge. Second, people should know, because if they call and they want to ask, you should be able to give them a web link. You should be able to do all sorts of things. And there's no reason not to. The information is available from a number of public sources, as you saw yesterday in some of the examples that we gave, Fair Health data. just publish it. We put it on our website. We put it all over the place. We, send it to whoever wants it. It's a PDF. They can download it. So I strongly recommend publishing your rates. There's no reason not to. Be transparent.
Okay, David has a question, if I can find him here. Can I find you, David? Oh, there you are. There you are. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, just a question for the room as I'm listening to Matt. How many in the room are actually billing different charges for resident and non-resident within your agencies?
Okay, in the room here, who's billing differently for residents and non-residents? No. Everybody seems to be billing the same. Eric Murray says they are doing differently. They are billing different charges. How about online? Eric, you can talk.
No, I was just raising my hand that we bill differently for both.
John Webb with Falcon says they're the same for all.
So Matt, is that something that we could probably look into and adjust with our billing company to change those rates? And I'm assuming maybe not so much for Colorado, but maybe a acceptable practice around the United States?
So you have to, it's a great question, David, and thank you for asking it. You have to figure out what's the basis for having a different rate based on the payer or for the patient based on payer. And generally, Medicare CMS has said it's okay to charge different rates based on some objective criteria. And honestly, it comes down to, are you getting a cost offset? Are you not? If you are tax supported and the people who live there are helping to pay your bills, Tim, then it makes sense for you to charge them a lower fee. If you're not getting a cost offset at all, and you're just surviving on whatever you can bill, then there's no reason to charge differently for someone who lives in your community or who doesn't. We don't get any tax subsidy and we bill everybody the same, whether you live in our community or not. But again, there are people who are heavily tax subsidized and they charge a lower fee because the assumption is that that person has already contributed to your budget. So you're going to charge them a different rate. Okay. That's plausible. That makes sense.
Tim has a question.
I actually have a couple, Matt. One is I have in the past, but not recently, so maybe something has changed. Fair Health Database have surfed around, taken a look at various areas and what their usual customary payments are. It seems like that is more of a consumer database, and they warn you that that's a consumer database and you can only serve so long before it kind of shuts you down. Is that your experience? And
It is, and unless you subscribe to it as a professional member, then you can do all the lookups that you want. When we've done these analyses, I got to tell you, it's pretty funny. So we know that generally, I believe we have found it's about 20 lookups before they shut you off and say, okay, you've reached your max. So we have a team of people who each log in at using a different IP address and have a list of the ones that they're going to look up. It is primarily for consumers, but it's used by quote unquote professionals under professional licensing fee to do good evaluations and analysis. Most of the independent dispute resolution people, the arbitrators and whatnot, use that, and the federal government uses it to determine adequacy of reimbursement, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still currently sort of the most used database for that.
thank you. And the second question is, what is the status of balance billing patients writing off the deductibles of patients who pay taxes to your district. I know there's been several OIG opinions that tax payments can be considered in lieu of payment of deductible and copays. Is that still a valid? And is that a way of handling district residents versus non-district residents? Charge them the same, but write off their deductible and co-insurance because of their continued obligation to pay taxes.
Yeah, again, the net effect is that you're charging them a lower fee, or you're accepting a lower payment, if you will. And that's okay. Those have some foundational financial, passes the financial sniff test. Where the OIG has gotten a little bit more direct is when a private agency is bidding an ambulance contract, and as part of the bid, they say, we are not going to collect deductibles and co-insurances from people who live there, even though they're not getting a tax subsidy, as a way to get the contract. Medicare thinks, at least the opinions I've read, that that's sort of a kickback thing, that you're giving some financial remuneration in return for business that you will be billing Medicare for. So you need to be careful with that. But if you're a governmental entity, or even if you're a private entity and you're getting tax subsidized, that makes perfect sense that you're going to reduce the fee to someone who's paying taxes to support you.
Another question. So for a small service, when you're evaluating the billing performance and how hard your billing company is working for you, how can I look at some of my reports and see insurance underpayments that maybe my billing company may not be working appeals to get the higher payment? How would I know that? If my billing company doesn't tell me that, how would I know if insurance is underpaying, or and then I need to work with my billing company to do appeals?
Yeah, so you should get payer level detail. So all those reports that I showed you, you can get those by payer level detail. So you could get a 30, 60, 90 day, whatever time period it is, aging detail, if you will, that basically says for Aetna, Ambetter, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, go right down the list. Here's the number of claims submitted. Here's the amount of the bills. Here's the amount of the payments. And you can drill down pretty quickly and find out, like I mentioned yesterday, Ambetter paying the Medicaid rate. The reason that we figured that out is because we had a metric to look at average reimbursement by payer. And we said, holy crap, they're paying the Medicaid rate. What the hell? Because honestly, if they had been thrown into the whole mix of, the total fees collected from commercial insurance, we wouldn't have noticed that. But when you get the amounts paid by payer, not payer class, by payer, that's where you can tease out the underpayments and go after them.
Just so everybody in the room knows, and even online, Colorado, last year a bill passed the legislature. It was signed by the governor that they're going to give us access to the Colorado all payer claims database. So we'll be able to access that separate from Fair Health. So I think one of the things that you can do is, what does that all claims payer database show, even versus what you got paid from insurance? And that will be a free service that all providers can go in and look at. So I think that's huge for us in Colorado.
Now, there's a pitfall to that, though, Tim, and you know what this is, I'm sure, is that the payer database is great because you can compare what one payer is paying by CPT code, HCPCS code, whatever. But when they begin to amalgamate or consolidate information, now you've got average payments that start to go down because the insurers get together. Of course, they would never do this, but they get together and say, hey, we're only going to pay $1,000 for an ambulance trip. We're going to pay this year, and next year we're going to pay 900. And the year after we're going to pay 800. And now the prevailing fee, the usual and customary reimbursement, starts to go down because of a effort to reduce it artificially by the payers. So just, you can monitor that too through that all payer database.
Okay, so the question I have even with Fair Health is where does Fair Health get their data? I'm saying that an average payment in this geographic area should be $1,700. Even though, I mean, if, like that example you gave, if this service is normally billing 500, where does that data that says, oh no, you should be billing and expecting to collect 1,700? If it's based on claims data, where does that $1,700 come from?
From the claims submitted. So the payers and others submit, and they can mine it because they look at different payer databases. They look at the average bill for that CPT code. And then they look at the average payment, which becomes the network rate, if you will. That's why there's typically a difference between the in-network, out-of-network. The out-of-network rate is almost always higher because that's the billed charge. The other rate is what the insurance company is paying.
We still have two hands raised, David and Eric. Did you just leave your hands up or do you have questions?
Sorry.
No problem. Any
No, they're like me,
questions in the room?
they can't figure out, like me, they can't figure out how to lower their hand.
No other questions in the room at the moment. A couple of comments from Amy in the chat. The idea of charging less for residents versus non-residents could be seen as a good political move if you're going for a mill levy, especially in the resort communities. And she also noted to Tim that Eagle County Paramedic Services received an opinion letter supporting waiving the copay for in-district residents.
Yep. And I thought they issued a blanket one, OIG issued a blanket one a few years back because they were getting so many of these requests for advisory opinions that the OIG put one out that was kind of blanket. I've been looking for that and I can't find it, but I didn't know if you, Matt, remembered anything about it.
I do recall it, and I know there's been at least a couple of OIG opinions that say unless it's being used to obtain a contract that you're going to use to bill Medicare, it's okay.
Amy agreed with you.
Okay.
All right, I don't see any other questions online or any in the room. Matt, we'll let you go a little early and we'll see you back this afternoon at 3:15 God's time.
Yeah, God's time. Come back because we're back to jokes in the afternoon session to keep it light. And I got to tell, I'll give you a little peek. They're going to be very riveting for you. So,
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt.
bye all.